Good morning, diners, and welcome to another edition of the Collapse Morning Wake-Up Call here on the Doomstead Diner. And today we are kind of resurrecting an old program that we did regularly, which we called the Collapse Cafe. And in fact, our YouTube channel is still called collapsecafe.com. So you can go there to find all our videos. But we retired the Collapse Cafe a couple of years ago, and I didn't do too much video. I went through a period where I was really sick, hospitalized a few times. But now I'm a little better, and I've gone full blast into doing video. So that's what we're doing today. And with me today is one of my regulars on the Collapse Cafe. He's well known in the Collapse community, professor of physical chemistry at the University of Firenze in Italy, and he was one of the original authors of the Limits to Growth study that was done back in the 1970s, and a very knowledgeable man on just about all aspects of collapse. So I'm glad to welcome him back, and we're going to talk about a few things that are impacting on the world of collapse. All right, and now here's Ugo. Ugo, say hello, wave hello or something to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. Okay, and I think you can see in his apartment there, his new place, he's actually moved into a new digs in Italy. Moved out of a big house, and he's somewhere in town now. Can you tell me a little about that adjustment before we get into some collapse topics?
Yeah, that's a very nice apartment where I live now, which is underground mostly. You can see around me, this wall here is against the rock, and 3 walls out of 4 are all against the rock. We are in a cavern, like our remote ancestors of Stone Age, and that makes a very, very nice living condition, because right now Florence is having a heat wave. We have 35 degrees centigrade out there, but here is fantastically nice. No need of air conditioning.
Wow, that's really good. And you know, so
yeah, that's what there was a reason for this.
Yeah,
and it means that if you live in Florence, if you live at the top floor of a building, if you have air conditioning, you survive. Mm-hmm. If there is a blackout and you are not in perfect health, you die. I think so.
Yeah. Metal roof, oven, you know,
yeah.
Where, you know, in your case being down under the ground, the earth maintains a fairly steady temperature, you know.
Yeah. It's very nice also as a bomb shelter. It should
right.
be safe.
You're okay. You're okay in a thermonuclear war.
My blog, we have a real bomb shelter in the garden. It's fantastic.
I'd love to see some pictures of this place. That sounds really cool. You got to send me some pictures.
I will.
Very cool. And the only disaster that maybe wouldn't be so good in would be an earthquake, and you are prone to earthquakes around there, correct?
Yes, Italy is an earthquake zone, so we are at risk a little bit. Let's say this house here around me is about 100 years old. It seems to have survived so far. I'm not so much worried about a major earthquake striking this specific region of Italy.
Yeah, I think, you know, the real earthquake region is a little bit north of where you are.
Yeah, depends where. Southern Italy is more prone to earthquakes.
Oh, it's the south? Okay.
My grandmother went through the big earthquake of Messina in 1908.
Yeah, we had a big one here in Alaska a year ago. Was
Uh-huh.
was I've been through many of them because this is a real
Yeah.
earthquake zone.
So, of course, you
But
are in the ring of fire. You have to
absolutely,
expect
absolutely, right
earthquakes.
smack on top of it. I've got Mount Redoubt about 4 miles from my place. It's an active volcano. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that it's like Vesuvius, but bigger. And then there's a couple of other ones. At any rate, but I've been through a lot of earthquakes. Sixes, fives, and sixes on the Richter scale. But this one measured out at 7. It was shallow and very close, and it was a totally different experience. I mean, I have never been so terrified in my life. I mean, I seriously thought my apartment was going to come down on my head. The whole place was, the whole place was shaking. And
Earthquakes can be scary. Yeah, I've been living in Japan, and that sometimes was scary.
yeah, I mean, I'm crippled now, but I swear, in the last 5 years, I have not moved as fast as I did. I got out the back door in about 15 seconds. I mean, most normal people could do it in about 2 seconds because it's only 20 feet that way. But I got over there and I got out of the place, and it was still going on. It went on for about a minute or a minute and a half, and
Yeah,
and the
I
place
don't
didn't come
see
down.
for us earthquakes are not the major source of worries right now.
No, you got a lot. You got more on the economic end and whatnot. So
Yeah,
let's move.
that's the problem.
Yeah, let's move on. Let's move on to those topics. Uh, the uh, the banking system in Italy, always in a state of crisis, has been basically going as far back as 2008, really, uh, when with the financial crisis that hit the whole world, and the European Union or the European Central Bank has done their usual stuff of extending loans and extending and pretending that someday they'll be paid back and whatever. I did read that they're talking about setting up an alternative currency to the euro in Italy. Have you heard much about that?
No, that's a recent novelty, but it's mostly noise. They want to make something that they call a mini bond, some kind of money that the government would pay its creditors with. But I don't think it will go through. It's printing money. It doesn't work. It has been attempted many times. It's just one of those sources of noise. When people don't know what to say, they invent these stories. But don't worry about that. It will not happen.
Yeah, I wrote as much on the diner, but Zero Hedge, was blabbing about it and whatnot, and
Blabbing, yeah.
that's the way Zero Hedge is. I don't read them anymore because, as a source of information, they've become pretty worthless. But in this case, somebody posted up on the diner an article about it, and that's how I know about it. What about on a more practical level, in terms of the jobs in Italy, the pensions and so forth? Are they holding up? Or where's the money going as far as the population as a whole is concerned?
You see, the situation is interesting. Italy, it's a long story. From
I got a lot of time, Ugo.
I got one. That would be long. So Italy could be a resilient country because it's a country which has some good points. It's a good manufacturing system, a good agricultural system. Then we have this tourism which brings in money from all over the world. So theoretically, we could survive even better than other countries. For sure, we are not subjected to what people call the Dutch disease. When your economy depends on a specific resource and you run out of that resource, then you're in trouble. Like Saudi Arabia, not yet in trouble, but soon, like Yemen, like Syria, like Venezuela, these places were very much depending on oil. And you notice, if you look at the recent history, that every time when an oil-producing country starts not being able anymore to export oil, then it is civil war immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Italy has this advantage that we have a reasonably flexible economy. So it could survive crisis. We could, in principle, we are subjected to a form of Dutch disease, which is related to tourism, as you were saying. Tourism is one resource that Italy relies upon a lot, but it could dry out rapidly in case of a major international crisis, maybe make people afraid of traveling or with.
Well, it's really the economics of tourists. You know, I mean, can people afford?
Sorry, I didn't hear you. Yeah?
I said,
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I said it's the economics of tourism that can get in the way, which is the tourists. Do they have enough money to go to Italy? You know, to buy those plane tickets and so forth. So if you get a financial crisis that is generalized, then you start to lose your clients. You know, the people stop showing up.
Exactly, but note that on the whole, tourism for Italy is not so important as oil for Saudi Arabia. So it would be bad, but not so bad for the whole country. So some specific areas of the country, like Florence, where I live, if tourism dries up, it's a disaster. It's like an atomic nuclear weapon going off. This place, I don't know how people would survive, because everything here is based on tourism.
Right.
Take away tourism and people die, I think. But I think we'll see that. Not in the remote future.
Hopefully not too soon. You know, and that's always a subject of discussion on the diner and just generally speaking, which is what's the timeline here? You know, when will we really see, you know, real collapse? You know, not you know, sort of this slow catabolic collapse that John Michael Greer talked about, or the long emergence.
Collapses are never slow. On this point, I admire John Michael Greer, but on this point, I disagree. If it is a collapse, it has to be fast. Otherwise, it is not a collapse.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. And also, you know, the Seneca cliff effect, where you know, it takes a long time to work your way up to a certain point, but then when shit starts to fail, down you go. And it happens a lot faster. And another thing that I tell people is, you know, in any kind of real time, what we're seeing now is a fast collapse. I mean, if you look at the difference now from where we were at in 2010 or 2008, you know, just basically a decade of time. I mean, the amount of chaos in the world, the amount of oil that is left, and the pollution problems and all the rest of that. I mean, it's exponentially larger, these problems now. And, you know,
2008 was a hint of things to come, I think, and they will come. And I think it's interesting because tourism is the weak link of the chain.
Definitely.
Faster, because most people just can, if they don't have money, just one fly to Italy. But it will be bad for Italy, but the rest of the world will survive that.
Yeah, and you know, similarly, you know, it's a leading indicator, but you know, for me, in terms of you know what's going to really sort of kill the industrial civilization is the failure of just-in-time trucking, and when the freight drops too much. And, you know, that is something that we see really progressing along now.
Another thing which is another weak link is the transportation
Yeah.
system.
Definitely.
Must, because most people just can, if they don't have money, they just won't fly to Italy. But it will be bad for Italy, but the rest of the world will survive that.
Yeah, and you know, similarly, you know, it's a leading indicator, but you know, for me, in terms of you know what's going to really sort of kill the industrial civilization is the failure of just-in-time trucking, and when the freight drops too much, and you know, that is something that we see really progressing along now.
Another thing which is another weak link is the transportation system, the just-in-time system, the container ships that bring food, and not tourists. They don't bring tourists, but food. And tourists need food.
Right. Yeah.
So
the ships moving tourists around are the ones that crash into docks in Venice.
yeah, that's a point. That was fun. But you know, Venice is a strange place. Venice, you know, Florence, where I live, is a strange place under many respects. But where I am now, where I am living, I'm just on the edge of the tourist zone. The tourist zone is very well delimited and concentrated and specific. You march 100 meters, 100 yards outside the tourist zone, and there is my apartment, and there are no tourists around here, zero. March 100 meters onward toward the center, and you're surrounded by tourists everywhere. But Venice is tourists everywhere. There's no place free. So it's Venice. Really, it's a Disneyland city. It's not anymore a city. Florence still has some elements of a real city where you can be not being sort of tourist operator or things like that.
Yeah.
Some places in Florence don't give you the impression of being in Disneyland. Venice is full Disneyland all over.
Right. Now, in terms of your location, you said you're, you know, just outside of the tourist zone. What about as far as your work is concerned, the university? Can you walk to the university?
No, I cannot, because the university is on the other side of the city, but I don't need to go through the center of the city to do that. Actually, we have this problem. Florence is a rich city, so a lot of people have big cars. It's one of the worst cities in the world in terms of traffic. It's a disaster. But
sure. Those roads the road system was all designed before the automobile, you know, and they're narrow and so forth, and then the cars are big. It doesn't match up.
You see, one of the reasons why I moved away from my previous home is that I wanted to get rid of my car.
Right.
And I haven't done that yet, because I find it's a little bit like quitting smoking. Selling your car forever is difficult. I want to do it, but not yet. It's sort of frightening. I have had a car from when I was 18, always had one car, normally at least two.
Right.
And now getting rid of my car, oh gosh, I theorized that. But I think I'll do it.
Yeah, well, can you, what is the actual distance that you would have to traverse to get to the university? Could you do it on a bicycle?
I think I could, yes. Not in summer. That would be killing death. Too hot.
Electric bike, an electric bike.
Maybe yes.
I ride around. I have an electric
that's very
scooter.
nice. That's very nice. It works.
Yeah, they're great. I love my electric scooters. I have a couple of different. I have a couple of different ones.
The cars are too big. Yeah. They don't fit Florence.
Right. Yeah, you should look at. I'll send you some. What do you call it? Details of different electric scooters, because I have a lot of experience with them.
Yeah.
And you know, you can buy them quite reasonably. It's not like buying a fucking Tesla. Uh, you can get a very good one for $1,500 US.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm looking at one now, a real awesome model, 4-wheel drive, off-road capability, electric, and that one will run me about $3,500 US. And it has a 45-mile range on a single charge, and it'll do about 25 miles an hour. So, if you're 15 miles away from where the university is, then you're there in a little over half an hour. And
it's possible, but anyway, we can always find ways to manage. But really, it's impressive. The impression I have moving into the city, because I was living in the suburbs before, and the impression I have is the city itself is choked with cars everywhere. You get this impression. I was not used to that, because the suburbs are a little bit. There's some more space. You don't have the problem of parking. You don't have traffic jams. You have to drive a long way to whatever you need. You have to take a car. You need buy a coffee, and to get a coffee you take a car, because here no. You just walk out of here, and there are coffee shops everywhere. But the place is full of cars. It's a strange sensation.
What about the atmosphere, the pollution? Is the air significantly air quality compromised as far as the city is concerned compared to where you were living?
Perfect. The atmosphere, the air quality is not so bad in Florence. We survive because most of the center is forbidden to cars. And since people can afford to buy modern cars, they are equipped with filters, decent filters, the most modern filters. So you don't have this problem of all cars polluting all over. And so it's survivable, let's say. Not very good, but survivable. And so where in Italy the situation is very bad is in the north, in the region of the plains, northern plains, or the Padang Valley. That's horrible. You are in between two chains of mountains. There's very little wind, and so people really risk to choke. The atmosphere quality is truly, truly, truly bad.
Is that all where the industrial machinery is?
All the industrial, most of the industrial, the factories of the concentration of all industrial production is there, but it is a region which doesn't have much wind, so it's bad. But they have to find something because it is bad for their health. And you may have noticed that the life expectancy at birth of Italians is still one of the longest in the world, possibly the longest in the world. But it started to go down from 2014, according to some of the data. The trend is not yet so clear, but it used to be growing all the time, growing. Then 2014 it sort of plateaued, and it may be going down, probably in part because of pollution.
What about the birth rate? In the industrialized
nations, as everyone
nations.
knows, it's very low, one of the lowest in the world. Italians don't make many children. Which is part of the concept of the demographic transition. I don't think we have, it is a problem. We have so many people in Italy, it's crowded. People everywhere. In addition, we also have all these tourists, and we have immigrants, and with plenty of people around. So I think people understand this point, and they are not keen of having many children. At least the situation is not so bad here as it is in other countries in Europe. If you look at countries of the former Soviet Union, like Ukraine, for instance, that situation is extremely bad, because not only people are not having children, but life expectancy is going down, so the population is dropping. That's a disaster, because, you know, I understand the question of overpopulation. And so we don't want to grow any more than the numbers we have now, but you cannot go down too fast, otherwise it is again, as I say, this collapse.
Right, and it becomes
countries are collapsing, not Italy.
Yeah, it becomes a demographic nightmare, basically.
Yeah.
You get a hole of where there should be a bunch of reproductive age people, but they didn't have kids. They get old, and then so, you know, all of a sudden there's, you know, no kids being born. And, you know, I don't know if you saw the apocalyptic film Children of Men. That is a film about a hypothetical situation where all the women in the world become infertile, and nobody's having babies, and it chronicles how the world spins down into violence and so forth. It's one of the best apocalyptic films that you should rent.
I understand. It's a typical kind of plot of science fiction. Science fiction in the 50s, in the 60s, they would explore this kind of nightmarish scenarios, like say radioactivity sterilize everybody, and that's what you have. People get old, no children, eventually the last old man die quarreling with each other in some desert somewhere.
Yeah, but as you also mentioned, you know, a lot of people, you know, will look upon this as a good thing, in the sense that, you know, the Earth is in serious population overshoot in terms of its resources and its ability, you know, in the absence of fossil fuels, to feed so many people. You know, I mean, industrial agriculture is incredibly dependent on fossil fuels, between the fertilizers and the fuel used for the tractors and combines and so forth, and then the fuel used to transport the stuff. The pesticides are made from fossil fuels. All that stuff, incredibly fossil fuel dependent. Without it, the vast cornucopia of food that a country like the United States produces in the breadbasket, the center part of the country, where all the wheat and the corn and the soybeans are grown, they're all grown in enormous industrial agriculture type farms. The entire state of Iowa is one big cornfield. And, you know, in fact, it's so monoculture that although Iowa had one of the most fertile pieces of land on the globe, they can't feed themselves now, because that's all they're fucking growing. They've got to import everything else. They export out the corn, and they import in everything else. So this whole system has become dependent on the food, on the way the food is moved around, and so forth. And, you know, the question is, how many people can the Earth reasonably support?
And advanced civilization without the need of growing all the time, which it's possible for at least 300 years. Then we don't know if it can last longer. I was examining recently the case of Middle Ages in Europe. That also was a very interesting period, but it was not stable in terms of population. The population in Europe during the Middle Ages kept growing all the time until it crashed during the 14th century. It's a long story of evolution, changes,
plagues,
wars and epidemics and everything happened. It was never quiet.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, the population leveling off in Europe coincided with the plagues that hit Europe during that time. So, you know, it was very much a health issue, and then we're seeing that now here with, you know, varying diseases. I published an article. Well, I didn't publish it, but I put it up on the diner in our forum about Los Angeles. In the homeless population, typhus and typhoid fever are making a comeback there. And then we have the measles epidemic as well.
That could be, but before we can have epidemics which really brings down population, it will not come unexpected. It will arrive only when you have a serious weakening of the health, of the general health of the population. At that point, you have a weak population, you can have an epidemic which gives the final blow to an unsustainable situation. But
right.
Also in Europe, during the times of the Black Plague, it was a consequence, not the cause of the collapse.
But you also do see that situation going on in Africa with the Ebola virus down in the Congo. The population has been weakened tremendously, and so an opportunistic disease like Ebola can grow rapidly.
I'm not an epidemiologist, but Ebola is a very minor problem so far, and it will remain such, in my opinion, as long as the population is in reasonable health, because we have antibodies in our body. We resist infections if we are healthy. Then we start being hungry, if we start being starved, if we are in bad shape physically, then we are easy prey to bacteria and viruses and those amoebas which can eat your brain, which is very easy. And so we are very easy to kill if we are weak. Otherwise, humans are very resilient creatures.
Yeah, the brain-eating bacteria. That's I know this one. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy is the technical name for that. That's mad cow disease, and that's the technical name for it. I remember. So at any rate, the food situation and how many people the Earth can actually support in the absence of fossil fuels is a major open question. Do you got any thoughts on that? The population is currently 7.5 billion. Do you have any thoughts on what might be a sustainable?
I have thoughts about that. I told you that I'm writing this new book on the Seneca effect of the collapse. Provisional, the working title is the Seneca strategy. Seneca strategy in the sense that I say that sometimes you cannot avoid collapse, but you can at least live with it. So in terms of food is one of the weak points of the system. Of course, the system is resilient in a certain sense because it can adapt to many things, but the system is dynamic also. It moves in a certain direction, it adapts. And adaptation may very well take the form of collapse. When the system cannot adapt anymore to a certain level, then it tips over and it adapts to another level. It's very simple. There is very little that can be done to avoid that. You still see me?
Yeah, you had a crash there.
A little accident here, not an earthquake. It's fine.
Yeah, but right now we just see your nose. We don't see your eyes or the top of your head.
Okay, now it's fine.
Can you tip it a little more?
It's fine. Again, I'm sorry.
There you are.
I was talking about collapse, and my cell phone experienced a little collapse, so it was perfectly correct.
Right, and your regular computer collapsed before that, which is why you're on the phone and not the computer. Complexity.
Anyway, there is no such a thing as a number of people that the Earth can support. It's always dynamic. It changes. It varies with time. And we see that population of animals, of ecosystems, humans too, go up and down. There are some cases of populations human population which found an equilibrium for a few hundred years. In my previous book on Seneca, on the Seneca effect, I cite the case of Japan. Japan had 300 years of population stability on a certain level of exploitation of the fertile soil, and the Japanese have this advantage that they have a lot of rain, and so they could remain at a certain level of stability.
Was that during the Edo period? Was that during the Edo period in Japan? You know, like
the Edo period. It was during the Edo period. It was an interesting period, a period of even intellectual vitality. It was very, very creative period. It was interesting, but not growing in population. And I think it shows that you can have an interesting, lively, and advanced civilization without the need of growing all the time, which it's possible for at least 300 years. Then we don't know if it can last longer. I was examining recently the case of Middle Ages in Europe. That also was a very interesting period, but it was not stable in terms of population. The population in Europe during the Middle Ages kept growing all the time until it crashed. During the 14th century. There's a long story of evolution, changes,
plagues,
wars, and epidemics, and everything happened. It was never quiet.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, the population leveling off in Europe coincided with the plagues that hit Europe during that time. So, you know, it was very much a health issue, and then we're seeing that now here with, you know, varying diseases. I published an article. Well, I didn't publish it, but I put it up on the diner in our forum about Los Angeles. In the homeless population, typhus and typhoid fever are making a comeback there. And then we have the measles epidemic as well.
That could be, but before we can have epidemics which really brings down population, it will not come unexpected. It will arrive only when you have a serious weakening of the health, of the general health of the population. At that point, you have a weak population, you can have an epidemic which gives the final blow to an unsustainable situation. But
right.
Also in Europe, during the times of the Black Plague, it was a consequence, not the cause of the collapse.
But you also do see that situation going on in Africa with the Ebola virus down in the Congo. You know, the population has been weakened tremendously, and so, you know, an opportunistic disease like Ebola can grow rapidly.
I'm not an epidemiologist, but the Ebola is a very minor problem so far. And it will remain such, in my opinion, as long as the population is in reasonable health, because we have antibodies in our body. We resist infections if we are healthy. Then we start being hungry, if we start being starved, if we are in bad shape physically, then we are easy prey to bacteria and viruses and those amoebas which can eat your brain, which is very easy. And so we are very easy to kill if we are weak. Otherwise, humans are very resilient creatures.
Yeah, the brain-eating bacteria. That's I know this one. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy is the technical name for that. That's mad cow disease, and that's the technical name for it. I remember that. From when that was a big deal.
See, it was like the AIDS epidemics. Everybody was afraid and scared. Was it going to be the end of the world, the disaster? But then it was not. It
Right.
abated. It's still a problem, but not so bad as people feared it could have been.
Right. Well, they did do a lot of work over the last 30 years since the original epidemic in terms of treatment programs, and now I believe they even have some kind of vaccine for it. So the
people are more careful.
Right, transmission much less.
If as I said, people are resilient. It's not easy to kill bacteria.
Right.
And so it's so it is.
Yeah, we got another crash there, huh?
Another little collapse. I'm sorry.
Right,
Next time I will be better equipped, and if I have a collapse, it will be real big. Okay.
That works for me. All right, so let's get off the population issue, we spoke a little bit about the pollution problem in north of Italy and traveling around by cars, and I know how much you are a proponent of moving towards renewable energy, solar PV, and so forth. You've written quite a bit about that. In terms of cars around Italy, has there been much transition over to EVs? I know in the northern countries, in Sweden and so forth.
That's a lot of things to say. It's very interesting because Italy is a country where cars are very important, as you may know. And if you have been living in Italy since a teenager, when I was a teenager, the car was everything. Italy is a country that really loves cars.
You should live in America.
Resistance against EVs. Lots of resistance. I can tell you, I write on a newspaper, on an Italian newspaper, and I'm a promoter of electric cars. I write, electric cars are very nice and a very good idea, and they don't pollute, and they can use renewable energy, and they also can have lots of advantage. And then people excoriate me in the comments. I have hundreds and hundreds of comments insulting me. You are a monster, you want us to go on foot, you want us to die, I have my car, I spent my money, I have my diesel car, I want it. But not just commenters on blog posts, which is a normal thing, but even there is a strong resistance at a certain industrial level against electric cars because of tradition, because for instance Fiat, as you know, the largest car manufacturer in Italy, they joined forces with Chrysler, and now they are Fiat Chrysler Automobile, but they are one of the few major auto manufacturers that doesn't have a decent electric car. Because they could not see it coming. They had a different kind of culture, and the culture of car in Italy is the car with a combustion engine.
Mm-hmm.
So even now, as I was saying before, in northern Italy, they are dying of pollution. They would badly need electric cars there.
Right, and at the very least, it moves the pollution from one place to another. The car itself doesn't pollute, but then, unless you're using all renewable energy to charge them up, they're using fossil fuels in the plants that generate the electricity. So that happens somewhere else.
It takes time. It's a revolution, but all revolutions are also evolution, so it takes time even for a revolution. You cannot do it in a few days.
No. Doesn't happen overnight, if it's going to happen at all. All right, so just one more topic before we close it for today, which is issues on the international level as far as trade is concerned. There's an ongoing major trade war between the FSA, the Fascist States of America, and China. That's been revving up. There was talk from our clown in chief, Donald Dietrich Trumpovetsky, about tariffs on Mexican goods, being put up, and then there's issues with trade with the EU, the EU's trade with China, companies like Huawei that are producing high-tech stuff being boycotted or banned, so forth. And then you've got the bans and boycotts of Iranian oil ongoing from the United States, that they don't want anybody buying Iranian oil, try to starve them out. What do you see happening as far as trade is concerned as we're moving down this collapse highway, if you will? Where do you see the trade going?
Something gigantic is going on, something enormous, some big, huge, humongous change in the world, and it is difficult to interpret these enormous changes because, in a sense, what we're seeing is this collapse of the empire that we used to call globalization. Globalization is, or better said, it was an economic system. It is all based on free trade all over the world, and it is based on a single currency, which is the dollar. And it has been working for maybe 50 years. It's an empire. It's a system
basically since Bretton Woods. Since the end of World War II, 1944-45, the original Bretton Woods Agreement. That was when the dollar was established as the world reserve currency and so forth. So call it say 1949. So call it 70 years. Of globalization.
Could be. And you see, with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, it seemed, yes, there was so the globalized empire was becoming, it could become a true world empire, the first world empire in the history of the world. There was something similar within Britain, had some kind of a world empire for a while, but this was much bigger. And then it is disintegrating, it's going, it's disappearing, and it is difficult to understand exactly what's happening. In a sense, it is because the cost of the resources. An empire is like an engine, it needs fuel. It needs fuel to move, because it costs a lot of money to keep the transportation system, carry goods from one place to another. The army, the fleet, the everything that's needed for an empire. Empires are very expensive things. So maybe it is just that we cannot afford it anymore. And so it is breaking apart in smaller pieces which are easier to manage. It could be, that's the simplest explanation. It is exactly what happened to the Roman Empire back during, say, the 3rd century of our era. It used to be a single empire, then it split into 2 parts, west and east, because a single empire was too expensive to manage, and that was it. But on the other hand, we are having more than that. It is more than just an economic question. It is this huge thing, which is the cybersphere, the internet, the communication system, which is growing, expanding, and taking up a life of its own. And maybe it is also resistance against this dominance, not of conventional weapons anymore, like aircraft carriers and fighter planes and bombers. These are all, in my opinion, is all obsolete stuff. But it is this gigantic communication thing that we don't know how to use yet, and we are afraid of it, especially the rulers of the globalized empire. They are afraid of what the internet is doing to them, and they're trying to break down the world in chunks to try to control them better, because if information were really free, as it is becoming, then controlling the world for an elite would become very difficult, perhaps impossible. So there are several effects which are moving on, intersecting each other, more higher costs for material things, but lower cost for virtual things. So it's a very interesting story. We will be seeing what happens. I have no idea. The only thing I can say is that I think my next cell phone will be a Huawei. Huawei, do I pronounce it right?
That's as close as I can get. As close as I get to it. I don't know. I have to get a Chinese person to pronounce it for me, and listen to it. Huawei. Whatever. Yeah, it is very interesting. One thing you didn't bring up in the discussion of the internet, though, was the tremendous dependence that the internet has on energy. It's estimated now that 10% of the global energy consumption goes to maintaining the internet and communications networks, the routers and so forth. It's burning up a lot of juice.
That's right, but that can be solved. I mean, the internet doesn't need combustion engines. It doesn't need liquid fuels. Doesn't need planes. It doesn't need ships. It's if we can keep the internet alive, we can do it with the renewable energy or electricity in general. So I think internet could survive if the whole thing, the whole empire doesn't collapse, doesn't really crash down very badly and very rapidly. And in the meantime, I'm seeing myself as a good Eurasian citizen. I'm living on a peninsula west of Eurasia. And for my part, I welcome my new lords from Beijing.
There you go. Yeah, and similarly here, you know, the Ruskies used to own Alaska, and you know, if Putin wants to come over here and whatnot and take over the show, that's great. I speak a little Russian, you know, just a Danya, whatever. You know, and there's still a lot of Russians around here, you know. Russian Orthodox are migrated here quite a bit.
Health industry, yeah.
So, you know, whatever. You know, I have no great affection and love for the current government of the fascist states of America. It's really become quite a joke on many levels, and but a dangerous.
And
a dangerous.
I think I start learning Chinese.
Right. There's a great Werner von Braun, great song by Tom Lear about Werner von Braun, and it's and I'm learning Chinese, says Werner von Braun. When von Braun left Nazi Germany and started building rockets over here for the United States, how he, you know, how his ethics and his morals were completely malleable. You know, who cares where the rockets come down? You know, it's not my department, says Werner von Braun. He's only concerned with getting a rocket.
Dominance change very soon. Right now it is English. Everybody wants to speak English, and give people a few decades, and everybody will be speaking Chinese, I think, and use Huawei phones.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, I'm not so.
Or maybe not.
I'm not so sure about that. I think the Chinese have a lot of problems, but that's one of my own opinions. All right. So it was again a fabulous conversation. I just love talking to you, Ugo. And as far as you folks are concerned out there in Dinerland and other people who are observing the collapse of industrial civilization with us, we invite you to visit with us. We're on the air fairly often now, and well, that's all the doom. This time until next time, here on the Collapse Cafe. Not the Collapse Cafe, I'm sorry. This is the Collapse Morning Wake-Up Call
It was a pleasure.
of the doom.
I think I have to leave you now.
Okay, yeah, you flipped off, and I did my goodbye. So I'll talk to you on the phone. I'll talk to you on the phone or on the by email.